into the sky. I gotta listen to Sounds of Blackness because it's rough out here right now, folks. Sound of Blackness keeps me encouraged. You're also going to hear the sound of my papers rustling because I've got some news to share with you all today. Hi, YouTube. Good to see you guys. Been a long weekend. We got a lot to get to this morning, and I already explained to the folks at Urban View that this is going to feel a bit like a fire hose. So much so my microphone is dropping here. Let's get this adjusted. It's going to feel like a fire hose of information. Y'all know I already talk fast. Some of y'all have complained about how fast I talk. I'm sorry. If you're on YouTube, you can slow this down. You can listen slower, or as one of the callers last week says, just learn to listen faster because I've been talking this fast since fourth grade. It's been a thing probably before that, but I don't think anybody noticed. Anyway, we got a lot to get to today. WEI hires are back. White, entitled, and incompetence are now running the nation from the rooter to the tutor. And we got to talk about it because it's disconcerting to say the least. Disconcerting to say the least. Now, for those of you who are hearing the phrase WEI for the first time, you may be thinking, wait a minute, didn't she mean DEI? Like diversity, equity, and inclusion? No, oops, my chair is too high. Gotta lower this. Never mind, forget it. I was trying to fix my chair in real time. Whatever. Sorry, my head is cut off. Sorry. If I go up, then the camera, forget it. WEI hires for people. Sorry, y'all. We're programming in real time. My show, the audience already heard how I had to run from the train and barely made it from a rally to get rid of the gang database in New York City. So it's been that type of morning. Anyway, WEI, for those of you who are not familiar with WEI hires. WEI is a phrase that I coined in November because I was very disturbed at the way that we were seeing people misuse the phrase DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, to describe white people doing the things that they think DEI Black people do. Now, remember, DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, affirmative action, these are programs that we only needed because of white America's holistic and collective agreement to prevent anyone who was not white from being able to access anything, opportunities, resources, whatever it is. Like if it were jobs opportunities, housing opportunities, education opportunities, white Americans for centuries had participated in a collective exclusionary process that essentially said, if you're not white, you need not apply. They didn't care about merit. They didn't care about qualifications. They only cared about your skin, your whiteness. And so we needed affirmative action, which was a program that was initiated by an executive order that was signed into law by President Lyndon B. Johnson. It was rescinded by the current president. But that executive order basically said, not only are we committing to diversity, equity, and inclusion, this is a paraphrase, but we're also going to essentially ensure that when the government is contracting with private America or private companies, private corporations, you cannot discriminate in the private sector. So the federal government having a policy against discrimination also meant that the private sector was going to have to adopt policies of non-discrimination. So that's how we got diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. It was only because white Americans were so scared of actual competing, so scared of actually having to engage like on a level playing field that they just cheated for centuries. And so that's why we had diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, when all of this anti-DEI stuff started, I told you, I was like, this ain't no anti-DEI, this is pro-segregation. They're coming for the Civil Rights Act. But what happened was I started seeing people, because white Americans, as they were doing anti-DEI, convinced themselves that they were doing anti-DEI because DEI hires were less qualified. And so we did the diversity math, and we know that if we have to be twice as good to get half as far, by the time we get to where you at, Susan, we know that we have essentially, we're 4 times better than you, simply because we had to overcome not just you, but all the other trips and qualification measures that you should have had to overcome, but you didn't because you're white. So we had to do all of that and be better than you at your job. And then we train you and you become our boss. Anyway, so that's where we get WEI, white, entitled, and empowered, or I'm sorry, white, entitled, and incompetent or inept. And apparently, WEI hires are now running the entirety of the federal government. Michael Harriot, who's a phenomenal writer, and one of his latest articles from his outlet, The Contraband Camp, reminds us that while Donald Trump said he was going to hire all the best people, what he basically hired was a bunch of white mediocrity that, quite frankly, should embarrass your ancestors. Like your white ancestors are, I mean, they're terrible people when it comes to those who promoted enslavement, but you really, y'all dug in the gutter, in the barrel of the trash to get some of these people that you have leading the federal government. And one of the things that Michael Harriot points out is that many media outlets, he says, is a direct quote, many media outlets have pointed out the most scandalous parts of his nominees' backgrounds, but few journalists have pointed out the most disturbing part of the MAGA kids class of 2024. The new Trump administration is incompetent. And he talks about the fact that competency is a binary reality. You're either qualified and you meet the qualifications, or you don't. And if you are talking about someone who is qualified, then you have the people like General Lord Austin. You have the folks. Who was the other general that they got rid of today, who was the head of Joint Chiefs of Staff, General C.Q. Brown, who has a bachelor's in civil engineering, his master's in aeronautical science. He has decades of service. He was appointed during the previous administration, Trump administration, and they just got rid of him for a white man who don't got nearly the same amount of stars as General C.Q. Brown, meaning that he hasn't served as long, he hasn't done as much, he is unaccomplished, he is incompetent. He's incompetent to lead. And we know he's incompetent because the reason he got his job, we believe, is because he said the following to Donald Trump: "I love you, sir. I think you're great, sir. I'll kill for you, sir." That's all you need in this administration. You just need to be white, just be entitled, and just be incompetent. And then Michael Harriot walks us through a number of the folks who are now in these positions, and we've talked about some of them before, like Robert F. Kennedy, who has an affection for destroying bodies of dead animals, strapping them to his car and doing all sorts of weird things with them. But Robert F. Kennedy, Michael Harriot points out, has never studied or never worked in health or human services related field, which means he is unsuitable for the particular purpose of serving as Secretary of Health and Human Services. Dr. Mehmet Oz, similarly, who was identified by two separate groups of actual medical doctors, determined that, according to Michael Harriot, he did not possess the adequate ability to lead anything. Kash Patel, who we're going to talk about in a second, is now the least experienced FBI director in the entire history, the centuries plus history of the FBI. And he has now been supported in his effort to lead this agency, which he knows nothing about. He's never been an FBI agent. He ain't never served in the FBI. He is unqualified. He is incompetent. Now, he's not white, but he's white adjacent. But he has now been joined by Dan Bongino. Am I saying that correctly? I think I might be messing his name up. But Dan Bongino also has never served in the FBI. But you know what Dan Bongino does do? He spreads misinformation and disinformation campaigns. So much so that the radical left, I'm kidding, but the New York Times, which is quite frankly radical right at this point, they even said, and this is significant because this is a New York Times we're talking about. This is not like a fair and balanced media. This is media that has been so heavily skewed towards the Republicans. This is kind of shocking that this got through. But the New York Times says the following. The choice of Mr. Bongino is a radical and abrupt departure from that practice. The practice of having only people who've ever been working as federal FBI agents, Federal Bureau of Investigation agents. There's a tradition. You can't be in the leadership if you never served in the body that you're leading. That just seems to make sense to me. But they said that this choice of putting Mr. Bongino, who ain't never served in the FBI, is a radical and abrupt departure from that practice and raises startling questions about how two people who have never served as FBI agents will oversee the vast surveillance and investigative powers of an agency of 38,000 people and a budget of about $11 billion. The combination of Mr. Kash Patel and Mr. Dan Bongino will represent the least experienced leadership pair in the history of a bureau typically insulated from White House interference. It will also ensure that the Bureau will be run by men who have freely peddled misinformation and embraced partisan politics. Mr. Bongino said in 2018, "My entire life right now is about owning the libs." Now, these people are going to be in charge of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And these are people who have only spent the past several years promoting misinformation, disinformation, bad information, lies. And they are now going to be in charge of the Federal Bureau of Investigations. We're also seeing that in other WEI, white, entitled, and incompetency hires happening all across the government, that the CIA, they recently sent an unclassified email to the White House that was essentially a list of all the new CIA agents who are going to be put out in the field, working undercover, except that the unclassified email includes the first name and the last and the initial of the last name for all of these agents, which means anybody who has worked with any of these people or will work with these people will basically understand who they are and the fact that they are compromised. They're compromised. Now, according to the report, what we have also learned is that this means that not only are the people who were just about to be placed in the field now not going to be placed in the field, which means an entire new generation of spies. And it's weird because, quite frankly, I'm not a fan of the CIA or the FBI. I'm just letting you know that the CIA and the FBI are spaces that white America has traditionally always respected. And for some reason, they have decided that they will have white, entitled, and incompetent people put into these offices instead. But according to that, what we're also learning is that because of the way this email was sent, that all of the people who sat in the positions of being undercover in these assignments before The people who were just about to be assigned to those new positions. Now they are going to be able to be found out simply by determining who was working with whom. This is a pack of trash. Republicans do not know how to govern well. They only know how to govern for the billionaires. And you know how we know that? Because in addition to what the Financial Times is reporting, and we're going to have to hold that story because there's a whole story coming out of Kenya where we're realizing the negative implications of the canceled funding for USAID. And Kenya is asking very many of the same questions that we in Black America are asking, like, how the hell did we allow ourselves to become so dependent on an entity that is so clearly filled with white nationalist leanings? How did that happen? But in addition to that, we are also learning that and again, this is weird because I don't like the FBI. I don't like these things. I don't like these agencies, but it is a real tell for us that we have these people who are in these positions who are completely there to destroy the American government as it functions. And that brings us to Mayor Eric Adams, New York City mayor, because once again, he's caught up, wrapped up, and tangled up in this. And now what is a national issue? You guys remember how we talked last week about the fact that, was it 2 weeks ago? It might have even been 2 weeks ago now, that Eric Adams, mayor of New York, had basically, it is alleged by 7 to 11 of the people who resigned following this whole situation that his attorneys have basically told the Department of Justice, hey, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. And the attorney said that essentially his attorneys was like, listen, if you help me out with these charges, you know what I'm saying, I will help you out with some support with your immigration situation. But what we learned is that the attorney who was spearheading this effort, Emil Bovey, he was the one who was making everybody basically say that they were going to have to support this effort. They were going to have to support dropping the charges. Emil Bovey is himself somebody who was wholly unqualified. And apparently we now know that when he was working at the Southern District of New York, he ran the terrorism unit so terribly that he was investigated. And the investigation said he should not have this job because he is bad at his job. They didn't get around to actually removing him, however. But the reality is we have a complete government right now that is so busily populated with people who have no qualifications except for their effort to destroy the government. Then we find out that late last night, y'all, it's a lot. I told you I was going to feel like a fire hose. And then we're going to switch gears and talk to our friend Rick Martin about something completely non-politically related. But then we find out from Senator Chris Murphy and the Democrats who were busy last night in the Senate. Was it last night or Saturday night? I can't even remember at this point. Let me see. When did this post? Oh, this posted at 8 o'clock this morning. So last night, what we find out in the Senate is that the Republicans forced a debate on the billionaire bailout. Because remember, they are trying to cut as much as they can from your grandmama's Social Security, from your Medicaid, your Medicare, all your social services, and all the programs that our communities rely on, Head Start, after school, hospitals, all that. They're canceling that so that they are going to instead be able to give a permanent tax cut worth trillions of dollars to the billionaires. And so the Democrats, who do not have enough votes in the Senate to really stop a lot of this, basically put up a fight. They started voting at 6 o'clock last night, and they did so, the Republicans did so, because they knew at 6 o'clock in the late evening on a weekend, ain't nobody going to be paying attention. And so Chris Murphy says the following. He talks about the fact that there are all these tax cuts, as I just explained to you, that they are trying to now make permanent for the billionaires. But in order to do that, they have to go through, he says, Republicans have to go through a series of procedural steps. Last night, they took the first step, which requires them to pass an outline of their plan. But with it, any senator can offer as many amendments as they want. So the Democrats did that. They was offering amendments. The first amendment they said was no billionaires can get a permanent tax cut. Then they put on some other amendments, and they were like, whatever we can do. They put on a ton of amendments. They basically said that they put an amendment that said elongated muskrat and doe should not have limited access to Americans' personal data. They voted on whether or not to protect IVF and to require insurers to cover it. They put up every single amendment that they could, and every single one of them was shut down because the Republicans, who got their asses handed to them at all of their town halls. Frankly, I don't imagine another Republican will be having another town hall anytime soon, because have you seen the news? Have you seen the news about how the town halls have been populated with the whites? And the white Republicans are very upset with the Republican leadership because of elongated muskrat and because of all the cuts. And did you know how many Republicans are veterans? Did you know how many Republicans work in federal jobs who voted for Trump thinking that DEI meant everybody but them? Surprise. So essentially what happens last night is they know that what they're doing is not popular. They're trying to give a tax cut, according to Chris Murphy, to the wealthy that is 850 times larger than what they're offering to working people. And the tax cuts that the working people get will be washed out, he says, by higher costs for basic necessities like healthcare and food, which means poor people, working people are going to pay more money so that rich, wealthy people who don't need the programs that we need pay less money. they're going to get an 850 times larger tax cut than you're going to get in the working and poor classes. And the amount of savings you get as a working and member of the working and poor class ain't going to amount to nothing because your eggs going to be too goddamn high. This is where we're at. So he's calling it a 5-alarm fire, and I am as well. This is why Urban View and YouTube, we need y'all. You got to keep calling. You got to keep up the pressure. You got to make sure that you're calling your senators. You have 2 of them. You got to make sure you're calling your congressional representatives. You got to call your governor. You got to call your city officials, your municipality officials. You got to call the people. You got to write them letters. You need to be sending a 2-paragraph letter to the letter of the editor, because letters of the editor help shape the news. You got to call your news stations. You got to call everybody. 5-alarm fire. And white people in Coeur d'Alene, I'm pretty sure I pronounced that wrong, but Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, I can't remember. There is a town called Coeur d'Alene, maybe Illinois, I don't remember, but there's a town in the Midwest called Coeur d'Alene, and I'm sure I pronounced that incorrectly. And in Coeur d'Alene, they had a town hall. Idaho, thank you, Amina. They had a town hall, and at the town hall, a woman spoke out about why people were not happy. And do you know what happened? Some unarmed, some men with badges that didn't match up with anybody in Coeur d'Alene's official authority, who basically had no real authority, came and hauled her ass out the meeting. And people tried to stop them, but they didn't even know where they were taking her because these weren't actual real police. White people, I need you to understand that once they start exercising that level of violence against you, then they have crossed the Rubicon. And this is also why we're not joining on any protests, because we know that this sort of action would have happened way before it is happening now. Y'all better get ready. White Americans, the wealthy are coming for you. And this is going to be your opportunity to realize that all the hate you have for the blacks, all the hate you have for the minorities, all the hate you have for the immigrants was really misplaced. Because it's the billionaires you got to worry about, boo. We just all suffering here with you, but they have convinced you that you are some special snowflake. And you are, as Lyndon B. Johnson says, like the poor white man. And as Lyndon B. Johnson said, if the poor white man can be convinced that he is better than the best colored man, he won't notice that you're picking his pockets. Hell, he'll bend on over and give you his pockets to pick. White Americans, you are the bent over pocket picking, offering up person. So I just need y'all to know that. I'm gonna need y'all to figure out what you're gonna do, because we can't save y'all. We tried on November 5th, and y'all, it is what it is. So just want to give y'all your update. YouTube, thank you all for listening. Please like, subscribe, and share. Do all the things to make the algorithms. Hit the like button, hit the notification. Is there a notification? Hit the notification bell. Do all them things. And now we are going to shift gears. So I am going to change my speech. I'm going to change the rate at which I'm talking, because we have a guest, and this guest has nothing to do with politics, really, but everything to do with the shirt I'm wearing. Shout out to the global majority. There's a new drop of clothing releasing, and we're going to talk about it just now. But you see how my cadence shifted? Because we are signaling to the Urban View family members at 866-801-8255. The topic is also changing. We're not doing a commercial break. YouTube, thank you and appreciate you. But we are going to introduce our next